Have you ever tried to forgive and it just doesn't seem to work? This chapter is called Life Choice for a reason. The feelings that you have, they rise up out of your heart. They rise up out of the deeper part. And so there's sometimes when you can walk through everything that you're supposed to do and it just doesn't feel like forgiveness took. It just doesn't seem like anything's actually happening. This chapter is called Life Choice because there are deeply held values within you. Another concept that I use in a lot of my writings is the idea of normals. They're deeply held instincts of right and wrong. And when forgiveness violates some of those deep instincts, it's going to be hard to forgive and for you to actually feel it. So what happens in that case, and this is what the chapter talks about, you have to walk through it consistently over a period of time. And it may not just be a you thing at that point. You may need some people in your life holding you accountable, reinforcing, keep pushing you in a direction, say, take the next step. You can do it. Take the next step. And sometimes that's what forgiveness actually looks like. We want it to be a snap thing. We want to walk through. We want God to touch us. We want the release to happen and it's just over and done. No, sometimes forgiveness is a life choice. When you're thinking through unforgiveness, when you're trying to make decisions, when you're trying to get there and it's just not happening quickly, I want you to be encouraged that sometimes that's what it looks like. This chapter hopefully will help you take some of those steps and to be truly successful in forgiveness. Chapter 5 Life Choice. You know what's right. You even try to change your thoughts, and you definitely have said the words over and over again. But the raging in fire, but the raging fire inside of you won't go away. Are you just giving lip service to forgiveness, or is it truly a life choice? The biggest battle with forgiveness is not in the head, but in the heart. About the time that I was attempting to write this chapter, God plunged me right in the middle of a situation where I perceived that someone was hurting one of my children, and I was feeling it. I would wake up in the night. It would gnaw at me by day. Life choice. After writing so much about the ins and outs of forgiveness, it became obvious to me that my head could not deliver me. So what will deliver us from this body of death? Romans 7:24. Forgiveness is so much more than just a choice or a feeling. Oh, that it were that simple. I was tempted to write about it in clear terms of just do it. Then God complicated the process by putting me in the middle of my own situation while I was writing this chapter. All of a sudden, the platitudes were meaningless. Remember the chip that I spoke about in the story with my grandfather? My grandfather didn't feel like he belonged in his own home. He was struggling with a sense of not quite having accomplished. The irony is that this same chip was involved in my latest struggle with my son. I've always felt a little bit on the outside looking in, and now my son was feeling it. Doesn't that sound a little bit like the chip? The deepest pains usually do transcend the events we consciously remember. They come out of things etched on our hearts, sometimes through the course of generations. We harbor unforgiveness because of real stuff deep down inside. The more difficulty we have with forgiveness, the more closely the issue at hand is tied up with the core of our being. For me, my son was in the midst of a situation that was a mirror image to some of my most difficult struggles. It was touching a raw nerve in him, and I was angry because I could feel the depth of his pain as well as my own. That is when forgiveness becomes more than a decision. It becomes a life choice. It can no longer be a simple decision to forgive, but requires a decision to change a way of life. For me to forgive in this incident with my son was not an isolated choice, but something that would require a change at the core of my being. That is when forgiveness is very very difficult. The amount of pain a person experiences will always be relative to the amount of value he places on the situation. If the value is high, the potential for pain is high. If the value is low, the potential for pain is low. Those things that are most difficult to forgive involve things that are deeply woven into the fabric of our person. After all, what we care about is who we are. That means that there will be times when asking a person to forgive feels like you are asking him to deny himself. I've struggled several times with my children, feeling like they were being treated unfairly. What is so core to my being is seeing people live life to their potential. If that is how I feel about most people I meet, it is tenfold for my children. When someone seems to be blocking my children from achieving their potential, I feel absolutely justified in my anger toward that person. It is instinctive, and it feels right. To let go of my anger feels like the equivalent of forsaking my role as a father and as a human being. We're all that way in our own high-value areas. If something is offending us at a high level, it is offending something in our core values. To forgive in that area feels like a forsaking of the very purpose for which we were created. What am I to do? Stop being a father? Forgiveness can be like that, like we are being called to give up on our God-called role to be a father. Wherever there is a deep struggle with forgiveness, something is challenging the core of our being. That is why forgiveness is not a single decision, but a life choice. For me, the struggles I've had with unforgiveness are wrapped up in the fear, insecurity, and potential areas of life. Until I am willing to see that bigger picture and deal with the needed life change, wrestling with a single decision to forgive is like doing major surgery to remove a speck from one eye. We think out of our hearts. Whatever the core value is, that is where the mind will tend to go, and that is also how the mind will tend to interpret life's situation. If I have a situation that is stirring unforgiveness, my mind will be seen from a very egocentric point of view. To try to change my thought life without changing my whole heart is foolishness, even though I've seen many people try. For my grandfather, giving up the 40 acres was not just about giving up his rights to 40 acres. It was about giving up his chance to graduate from high school. It was about struggling on the farm alone with minimal help from his brothers. It was about being caretaker for his mom for many years. Our minds think according to the imprints written on our hearts. Suddenly, 40 acres was worth a family fight, even if it was 40 years later. There are instances of lower scale offenses. By lower scale, I'm not necessarily talking about the magnitude of the offense. A major thing can happen to us, and we can brush it off quickly or easily if it is low on our value scale. Whenever offenses are in an area of lower value to us, we frequently can and do decide to just forgive. Because we are sometimes able to do this, we tend to think we should be able to do this all of the time. Even in instances of major wounding like rape or abuse, there are some who hit a point of release and it is just finished. They get a breakthrough and it is over. Others stand by and marvel at the transformation. We then wonder why all people can't do the same. The answer is simple. When we're being asked to make a life choice, we will have to hold ourselves in God's place over an extended period of time to effect a change. Hearts don't change quickly or easily, especially when it is an area of core value. This ties in with a concept I teach called normal. Every one of us has a comfort zone that is mostly shaped by the spiritual conditions of our childhood. If we grew up in a family where love and acceptance were normal, We would have that built into our comfort zone. What is crazy, a person growing up in an atmosphere of abuse actually feels more comfortable in an abusive atmosphere than he does in a place of love and acceptance. For more on this, I suggest that you read Releasing God's Life, available through the Live Free Ministries website. A person who grew up in an abuse situation could even be offended by someone offering him love and acceptance. He might get suspicious and respond, "Why are you being so nice to me? What do you want from me?" I've actually seen people get offended because you offered them something. It is not a stretch to understand this. If a person's core values are in the area of providing for self or carrying one's own weight, someone giving them a gift becomes an offense. In order for the victim to forgive, he has to deny a part of the values system that is core to his being. That is hard to do. Forgiveness, at least the bigger forgiveness issues, are a life choice. These issues require that we move to a new spiritual location. That location may be trusting or letting go of fear. It may be humility or receiving. It may be embracing weakness so that God can be strong, or it may be placing relationship over productivity. But it will be an embracing of a values change. The biggest values change is accepting the kingdom values system. We are so instinctively wired to protect our own values that kingdom values don't come easily. God wants to establish righteousness on the earth through the vehicle of relationship. We want justice, or power, or revenge, or some other selfish need. The basic issue of forgiveness is understanding that the values we treasure are not the values of Christ. Virtually every major offense comes out of some value that we are holding dear that is not the value of Christ. If it were truly a kingdom value that we were holding, God would be in the midst of that value. If He were there, forgiveness would not be a problem nor an issue. It would be instinctive. But because we have elevated some value of our own to a place of godlike status, God is not able to inhabit the place we occupy. And without Him, we are powerless to forgive, unless, of course, it is a lesser issue. And if that is true, it really isn't forgiveness anyway. It is merely one human being having a large enough heart to overlook the pettiness of another human being. Do you see the ego in that? That is human-level forgiveness, and it doesn't carry with it the life of God. It is human goodness, which is better than human badness, but it does not attract the presence of God nor release the life of God into the situation. Instead, when God calls us to forgive, He is calling us to die to self. He is calling us to die to something that is very near and dear to us. And all we feel is very justified and angry because we are right and the other person is wrong. But there is none of His life in that. If we want His life, a simple decision must instead become a life choice. We have to realize that our own fears and insecurity are what drive the vengeance of our hearts. We must move to a new location and stay there for a period of time. The feelings won't necessarily come quickly. The thinking may take a while to start lining up with the new location. This is a life choice, not a simple decision. For me to make that life choice, I had to have people around me whom I trusted reinforcing the right decisions over and over again. So many times I wanted to go back to my default reaction and do it the old way. So many times I had to be boxed in by my accountability partners. And that is forgiveness? Yes. When it is a life decision, forgiveness is an all-out warfare, a consistent battle to change the key spiritual building blocks of your life. Dead dogs often are some of the most significant shapers of those spiritual building blocks. The wounds from our past help cement our subconscious life values. Life values shape thoughts and emotions. Thoughts give us a huge sense of self-justification. Self-justification screams against any kind of change, especially when that change seems to be accommodating some evil person who is wounding me. Too often we make forgiveness way too simplistic, and we leave people struggling with their reality, feeling condemned with their inability to just forgive. Life choice. Are you ready to make one?